Sydney now has a really interesting mix of people, but the oldest of those groups is the Chinese. And that's the thing that we haven't been good at getting into our mindset until I think quite recently. We aren't European in our geography. We're part of Asia. And the Chinese into Australia was the first part of that Asian focus on Australia, which obviously has continued and into the 21st century. The gold rushes, which is often cited as the beginning of the Chinese coming to Australia, they're coming for gold. But in the 1840s, before that, settlers are importing indentured labourers from China to work on their pastoral properties and so on. So they don't only have a connection to the goldfields, they have a connection to the sheep industry and Chinese people, of course, in rural towns throughout the whole of the East Coast from very early on. Once the fruit and vegetables of Sydney were being sold from there, the Chinese market gardeners, I think without them we might have all got scurvy, because they were the people that knew how to grow the veggies. They were the people that knew that you couldn't survive on meat and puddings and so on. Around the Dixon Street area eventually became part of huge conglomerate shipping, banking, department stores, all sorts of trade back into Shanghai and Hong Kong and mainland China. So I think that's a very interesting story that most Sydney-siders have not got a clue about. They would have seen those people as, oh, they're just the Chinese people who sell us bananas. But in fact, that was the headquarters of very big and growing empires across the Chinese Pacific area.
After 1901, the White Australia policy was still in force, and then a lot of the men realising that our future's not sure. So they weren't allowed to buy properties, but they were allowed to lease properties. Like all the market garden, they would be on lease. So therefore, a lot of Chinese were able to save a lot of money after paying tax. And a lot of them thought, now, if the new government of Australia, the Commonwealth of Australia, they might start nationalising our assets. Because in 1929, when the new Parliament of Canberra was built, two Chinese wanted to listen to the debate on immigration. But the security officers said, sorry, two Wongs do not make a white. How come? Well, you are Wong, which means you are yellow skin. You are not acceptable. Oh, we are born here. Doesn't matter, you are still yellow. So prior to that, the Chinese had the frightening thought that their assets might be nationalised by future government. So they accumulated a lot of money and went privately to the Commonwealth Bank or the government banks and bought gold bullion, bit by bit, privately, secretly. And every month there would be a ship coming in from Hong Kong or China, and they would trust some of the seamen, crew members, pay them a fee to export this bullion back to Hong Kong. And from Hong Kong, they spread the money to Zhongshan, our village. They also sent money to Shanghai and Hong Kong. So 4 different places, they gradually drew up architectural plans based on Sydney's Anthony Horden and David Jones. And these 4 department stores were built in each of these 4 places.
Contribution to the village was very important. And so for these men that had been overseas, had seen modern things, they wanted to modernise their village. And so donations for things like schools and medical clinics were very important. So those are 2 things that were often built, and they were usually built by a collection of people from overseas. So typically the village would say, oh, well, we want to establish a school, and they would send letters around the diaspora to fellow villagers in as far away as San Francisco or Peru or Sydney or Melbourne, and they would send money back. And that money would then be used to build a school, which of course then would serve the whole community, including of course the children of those overseas. And these schools are very important because they were more modern schools. They weren't teaching traditional education, they were teaching modern curriculum, and they were open to girls as well as boys. So again, these people, because of the money coming from overseas, they could afford to educate all their children, not just focus on the boys, which would have been traditional, and girls would have been neglected. So many of the women were educated.
There was a sort of a fear amongst the uninformed that their daughters would be dragged into Chinese gambling dens, and all sorts of terrible things would happen, and they would be hooked on opium. But of course there weren't a huge number of Chinese people in Sydney at this stage, so when they went to raid these dens, they kept finding Europeans in there playing these games, so that sort of took the wind out of their sails a bit. But the Royal Commission into it took evidence from a great many people in Sydney, including Chinese people. So it's really interesting because it's one of the first times where the actual Chinese voice is put down on the record.
The gambling, the game was called Packapoo Ticket, and that started in Circular Quay and then also in Surrey Hills. How was it called Packapoo? Because Packapoo means pigeon ticket, and no white man allowed to go to see the gambling, which is done at 6 o'clock in the 23 shops around Haymarket and Circular Quay. So that was a big gambling game. So that was all also illegal. And sometimes the judge would say, weren't you here yesterday, caught for gambling? No, I think that was my brother. So, you Chinese all look alike.
And there's a lot of interesting things in this Royal Commission, but one of the ones that really interests me is that most of those European women who gave evidence that showed that they were